Hello everyone and welcome to Make Believe. Well, we're playing World End Economica. Now last time they were reaching the final days of the virtual contest, but they stumbled into a problem. With the end of the contest, there's less people participating. Less people participating, less movement of stocks. Less movement of stocks, less chance to gain money. So it's gonna be hard for them to reach the first place. But as they were close to giving up, Yoshiharu had an idea that they started working on. I didn't quite understand the idea, but it seemed Hagana did, so they were working on that, and let's see if it pays out. It pans out. I slept face up. Hagana didn't say anything else. But whether in my dreams or in the back of my mind, I felt rather refreshed to have said it all. Oh yeah, also Yoshiharu told Hagana about everything that he plans to do once the contest is over. Small detail, you know. Also about his own dream, so that's something that he never told anyone. Also, it was huge that Hagana didn't outright reject or laugh at the idea. I felt my body warm up. And once sleepiness set in, I moved my hand. I reached out for Hagana's hand, as it was wrapped around her legs and held on lightly. Aw. For a moment, Hagana's body shrank back, but she did not try to shake me off. We slept just like that. Much like how the moon and the earth were tied together by gravity, that thin line connected Hagana and me together securely. That's cute. The next day, the final day, Hagana and I decided what we were going to do. Hagana was not going to look at her own terminal. It was because she knew she had done all that she needed to do. So all that was left was to be at my side, watching the results. But that did not mean she would not be of any use. She had to be there. She belonged there. She belonged at your side? I see you. It's game time. It's do or die. The instant trading began. I mumbled that to myself while Hagana nodded silently. Okay, the music. I dig the music. On the last day of the investment contest, there were red letters across the trading screen saying just that. The time until 5 p.m. was counted down, stirring things up for the participants. The numbers of participants dwindled even more than it did yesterday. I imagine, it seemed. Look at the entire marketplace, stock prices largely did not change. Instead, the trade volume of stock was completely different from before. Buying and selling, it was something that happened when a buyer and a seller appeared. They were like fish struggling in a largely dried up lake, trying to find water to swim in. But I saw something different being projected. I'd seen it in a film once, a scene where fish are swimming in the oceans of the earth. A net is raised and a large catch of squirming fish are caught. A big haul. People from Earth, which had a long history, had managed to craft out a wonderful phrase. How? I know. I just looked at clusters of other stocks, but maybe she was uneasy that I wasn't looking at the stocks we decided on. But I had complete faith in the data Hagana had calculated. If the great majority of margin buying ended up failing for the most part, then even without looking at the price fluctuations, I know. Filled with that much self-confidence, there was serenity in my mind at that moment. Just need 90 million moles, right? Small amount. We have 270 million moles right now. So the total amount of capital we can put up is 780 million moles. It isn't a small amount, but it isn't perfect either. If we started right off the bat, we'd be done for. Investing was like a game of rock, paper, scissors. Except it let you cheat and show your hand after everyone else. Even if you didn't know who put out the order, the screen constantly displayed the number of orders and completed trades. If one watched the same stock patiently, it became very transparent which participants were involved and how much capital they threw in. When aiming for a fraction of a percent, you really could almost picture the face of your opponent as psychological warfare ramped up. Right now, the fish were scoring back and forth. Especially on the last day of the contest, where there were people who couldn't reach the top ranks no matter how hard they tried. These people would most likely act irrationally in desperation. I had to wait until they tired themselves out. People like that were mostly playing this like a game. When gaming, if one were to play after losing motivation, interest would wane quickly. The one thing that should be of concern were the ones who were thinking they could profit by taking positions opposite to ours. If I just dashed off and threw in too much money, a stock at, for example, 1,000 moles would just pop up to 1,200 moles. If that happened, the sellers would close in. Certainly a lot of them would sell at 1,200 moles, I suppose. The ones holding onto the stock would set a high price with a smile on their face. The margin sellers would write a 1,200 moles selling price on their position list, and if it fell, then the fall would lead to profits for them. On the other hand, were we to hold on to stocks bought at the price of 1,200 moles each, we would have no choice but to take a stand and drain our funds. Really, the only thing I could do now was pray like Lisa. We're certainly to lose. To win, we had to make the opposite happen. So, we waited patiently. Okay. There we go. Image of the stocks. Within the marketplace, those running out of time alongside those who had lost interest probably left, leading to the continuing decrease in trading. The water that traders needed to swim in was very rapidly drying up in the marketplace. In technical terms, normally it would be said that liquidity had dried up. If there weren't others to trade with, the smallest of orders could cause the price to fluctuate wildly up or down. But if the price went up, then sellers would search for it. And when the price went down, buyers would search for it. I waited. As the red letters denotating the time left till the end of the investment contest continued to change as time elapsed, I did nothing and waited. Black Chocolate Corporate was a company that had a low trade volume. It wasn't a gathering spot for the ones flinging around, but it also wasn't totally ignored either. This was probably because of a large amount of margin buying involved with it. Was it from those who were still trading? Or perhaps for those who had already left the marketplace? Without knowing that, though you could follow its trend, there was a feeling that any possible movement would be large. Given that atmosphere, it should really have brought in more interest, yet it wasn't really well traded. I always made sure to close all positions 10 minutes before the market closed. In the marketplace, the last 10 minutes was where the demons lurked, as he mentioned multiple times already. But right now, I instead had decided to become the demon. The 760 million moles of capital at my disposal was a large sum of money, even for the imaginary marketplace. Even for the guy behind me in third place, obstructions and chaos in the marketplace caused him to lose 110 million moles in capital, leaving him with less than 300 million in leverage funds. Wow. On top of that, excluding myself and Mr. Crochet, the numbers and positions changed furiously in a gray blur. At times, there would be someone pulling upwards in ranking, like a fish surging forth in a flash of brilliance to rise up only briefly before dropping and sinking further. Were someone to look at the rankings, it would not be too strange for someone to get the misconception that I was done with trading. I didn't make any moves, partially also to feed those misconceptions. With the morning trading finished, I ate the food Lisa prepared, and then I waited quietly. Not once did Hagana open her mouth to say anything. An hour later, the market opened, and we went in to observe. A share of black chocolate corporate it went up in value by 9 moles versus the previous day, and it was now trading at 812 moles. The total trade volume from this morning was slightly over 42,000 shares. In other words, no more than about 32 million moles in capital had moved. Even look at the margin trading balance, for the most part, there was no movement. About time to steer things up. I murmured to myself as I entered a market order for 3,000 shares. Within the dizzying pace of the trading board that I had been monitoring up until that moment, I could feel the rumblings of a disturbance coming. It was the sound of a giant whale swimming. Keen-minded individuals probably felt it. After hesitating on my order, there was an agreement, and the share price became 813 moles. And then, as if acting in concert, someone also sold 3,000 shares. 812 moles. The fish were gathering, and for the most part, these were the thinker types. The time slowly became 2 o'clock. A little less than 3 hours to go. Okay, so it goes up to 5 p.m. Within the span of about 5 minutes, I made market orders for 2,000 shares and then 3,000. Drawn by that sound, the trade volume slowly started to rise. Sellers and buyers were gathering, and it looked like the sellers were prevailing slightly as the price became 810 moles. Though the tens mark acted as an obstruction, the sellers slowly started to eat away at that barrier. Soon it was 3 o'clock, and on the trading screen there was an announcement from the content sponsors. 2 hours remain. Everyone was trying to do something or another with the remaining time. Though it was obvious enough, that alone was enough to cause some commotion. As the trade volume went up another tick, I made my move. Hagana looked like she wanted to say something, as I became aware that she was looking at me. But I ignored her and continued to stare at the screen. 3:17. The commotion from the announcement died down, and everyone took a moment to take a deep breath. In one stroke, I made a market order for 100,000 shares. Roughly 8 million moles. 10% of the amount I could trade with. Naturally, for a buy order such as that, there wouldn't be enough sell orders to accommodate it. With each sell order coming one after another, the price suddenly raced upwards. 811, 812, 813, 815, 818. The price kept moving upwards, and from time to time it would match with someone's sell order. Owing to a quirk of the trading system, perhaps, the upward swing would only stop for an instant. And notice how it's increasing. 1, 1, 2, 3. It was certainly enough to wake up anyone who was asleep at the wheel. It started. I laughed with a complacent smile. Up until then, 100 shares, 200 shares, and at most 3,000 shares and 4,000 shares were transacted before things suddenly went up another order of magnitude. Water. There's water here. The fish came seeking a place to swim, and the spot where they gathered became the water for other fish as more and more were drawn to it. 20,000 shares sold, 10,000 shares bought, 5,000 shares bought, 7,000 shares sold. Seller's advantage. If you look at the margin trading balance, it was proceeding naturally. As the price went up, margin buyers would come selling things off in a hurry. Before that happened, one would sell, hoping to sell and run at a high price. The people thinking that many that way were numerous, and the ones scrambling to sell would continue to increase. And now we're going down. 813, 811, 810, 810, 810, 809. I thought I heard the sound of Hagana curling her hands into fists, but maybe I was just imagining things. The tens barrier was broken. 808, 807, 806. The price continued to fall. The push from the momentum brought along other traders who caught wind of it, and systematically they also came together. 804, 802, 800. At the hundreds mark, the buy orders increased by 200,000. But the raging assault pounded that mark relentlessly. If that wall fell, then the price would continue to fall. If the buyers were to ride this out, then selling would become more difficult, so the buyers supported that level fervently. The offense and defense continue as I pressed the key. While everyone was fighting with wooden poles, I felt like I was calling the shots from a tank. A buy order of 200,000 shares by a single person was made. The battle was reversed. How? Hagana mumbled my name, but it didn't seem to get my attention. He's just too focused on this moment. Apparently, the excess of mental stress was what caused her to mumble pointlessly. I made a sidelong glance and saw Hagana staring intently at the terminal, not bothering to look up at all. Last night, I had said that this trading was for Hagana's sake. That time, Hagana was really in a panic. That was why Hagana was waiting in anticipation. She was awkwardly expectant of the outcome. That awkwardness was because, up until this point in Hagana's life, I was sure that she knew all too well that hope had no meaning. A long time ago, it wouldn't be too out of the question to think that she might have given up on hoping for anything. But it was a boon to have been able to utilize Hagana's mathematical prowess for real-world problems, and Hagana responded to that. Hope was most definitely not meaningless. If something could be done, do it until it can be done. That was definitely not a meaningless thing. Her face held hope in an almost tragically awkward way, saying that hoping wasn't meaningless. Margin buying has increased. Looks like it was as you had described it. The share price returned to 814 moles. It didn't go any higher because if it increased any more, then sellers would come knocking, knowing that buyers also lay in wait for the price to go down before buying. Among traders, there must be those who made orders without fully understanding why. Within those, I watched the margin buyers closely. More or less, there was movement, but not very large movements. After shaking it so much, if they didn't move, then they must have been mostly dead. Based on calculations, almost 80% should be dead. 80%? The margin debt balance in total was 1.15 million shares. 80% of that was 920,000 shares. In other words, even if the price goes up and sellers came forth, 200,000 shares would be valued at 160 million moles. The leftover funds would still be over 500 million moles. It should have been doable. How? The price. And as Hagana said it, I looked at the share price. It continued to rise. 850, 816, 817. Someone fairly big had shown up. The sellers issued a challenge, but the buyers showed up and the price headed towards 824. The time was now 4. There was 1 hour left. For the ones with little byways of funds who were thinking of clawing their way into the top ranks by somehow grabbing onto the sudden huge rallies and sell-off, it must have felt like they only had an hour left to do things. The remaining fish flocked to the stocks, with even a bit of trade volume. Black Chocolate Corporate had caught a fair amount of fire too. After the price rose to 824, in one instant it dropped to 813, and in another instant it bounced back to 824 once more. She looked at that and spoke. Someone else's program has appeared. Perhaps so. The response is too quick, and the way it calls out the price is too uniform. Like a pinball, the price fluctuated along the same width. Suddenly, the price fluctuation started to move. And just like Barton said, like other people would also make programs similarly at some point if it was just a fail-safe method. It was clear that a program like Hagana's was trading according to the price as derived from the statistical price fluctuations. There was a limit to how fast a human's hand could move, so letting a computer handle things would take profits of less than 1% and repeat hundreds of times, allowing profits to pile up. But in the end, it only worked because there were foolish humans who went along with the machine's patterns of trading. Now that it was the last day of the contest, the ones who would prey on these were filtering in. They were the ones who thought things out. So now it's man versus machine. The price jumped up to 832 moles. The program responded and pursued faithfully. Sailors got into the fray, which led to an explosion in trade volume. The time was now approaching 4:30. Almost time for the demons. As expected, Hagana was looking straight at me. How? I looked at her slowly. I then nodded. Don't get scared. I shrugged my shoulders, then laughed. If you do, then it's over. Again, I waited. I waited fervently. The last 30 minutes from the viewpoint of those immersed in the marketplace was when the time seemed to go by in a flash. For the most part, people were at their limits, making orders in desperation. That price fluctuation was sending them equally through heaven and hell. It'd be bad if one were to give in to that torrent of emotion. You had to see through to people's intent. For mafia and war films, reckless actions were executed only in the last 10 minutes. The ones who died off easily were the ones who put their lives on the line in the last 30 minutes. 20 minutes. Hagana mumbled worriedly. The price was 824. It wasn't exactly a whale, but a sell order for 200,000 shares appeared. I put a buy order out for 300,000 shares. There was a whale. It seemed as if I could hear the voice in the minds of everyone who was participating. Birds that saw the spout of a whale gather, just like sharks smelling blood in the water gathering. Sellers put out sell orders in a screaming frenzy, but the buyers kept buying mercilessly. Many people understood why the whale appeared on the buy side. The margin depth balance was not sell orders waiting in the wings. They were dead. A dead paper tiger that said nothing. The price crossed over 840 moves and reached 850. Wow. My average stock unit price was 820 moles, which added up to a grand total of 490 million moles. If the price went up by less than 4%, then that would be 16 million moles. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough at all. With the remaining 400 million moles, I had to make up a bit less than 100 million moles in an unrealized gains. Timing. It was all about timing. I had to become the demon. I must laugh loudly and run past these people who could only stare at the screen dumbfounded and yell out in a half-crazy frenzy, unable to make an order in time. The place to focus on was here. Here it was. I let the time slip by, 1 minute after another. 13 minutes remained. 12 minutes. 11 minutes. 10 minutes. I didn't put out an order. It wasn't time yet. Sellers sold frantically while buyers bought frantically. The margin trading balance changed in a bustling manner. Margin selling was piling up, as was margin buying. Margin buying wouldn't collapse. This could work. At the moment, I was about to make the final buy order. How? Hagana's shout stopped my hand. Hagana's finger pointed at the margin debt balance. Those numbers decreased suddenly. Is it selling? I think it's people who bought earlier and are selling it off now. In that case, we had to wait just a bit longer. And he was about to get the timing wrong then. In order to get the greatest effect, it had to be after selling had stopped. However, a sense of foreboding crept up my spine. Before things took off, the total margin debt balance was 1.05 million shares. After things took off, the part that piled on afterwards was at most 300,000 shares. Despite that, the number had already dropped to 700,000 shares. There's a calculation error in the estimate. Hagana said it, as if reading what I was thinking. How much? The square root of that figure. In other words, 100,000 shares. The error range. It was true that any movement had stopped at a bit less than 700,000 shares. Did all those margin buyers decide to sell? Were they anticipating a price drop? 7 minutes left. I had to decide now if I was going to put out an order. The price was at 836 moles. Oops. If the number of orders was too great, there was a possibility that the orders wouldn't be agreed upon. That is, the outstanding orders wouldn't be processed and funds would get returned. That was bad. Frankly speaking, it was bad. There was nothing more disgraceful than losing while holding funds. It was the same as those who were so foolish as to be overly cautious and still end up dead in the water. I prepared an order with 400,000 shares. But what would happen if there was a large number of margin buyers still alive in the game? If that were the case, then we had to hold on until the last minute, or we'd get hit by opposing orders. The chance of that was 50-50. Well, you can count me out because I always lose at 50-50. No, that's not right. I looked at Hagana. Hagana looked at me quietly. Whether or not I would be able to acquire 200,000 moles wasn't the critical point. Could I trust Hagana's data or not? That was the question. Hagana pressed her lips together tightly and looked at me. Her face was full of anxiety. This trading should have been for Hagana's sake. I loosened up and then spoke. Well then, let's go. Okay, the music turned up again. I turned to face the screen, then put out the order. Starting at 836 mole, I cut down sell orders like a raging wave. Buying soon followed, but since my order had precedence, their speed was not enough. Before long, I pulled away from other buy orders and the price shot up into the sky. 800. Okay, there we go. 850, 860, 868, 874, 879, 882. The force of my one attack stopped there. But there, the buy orders that couldn't catch up acted as a second wave, which pushed the price over. It took my breath away as the price flew up to 895 moles in one go. The average stock unit price was 861 moles, in excess of 900,000 shares. 10% profits from 720 million moles was 70 millions. Almost there, but still not enough. Just 20 million moles left to go. The buying flooded in with 3 minutes remaining. 887, 898, 899. The hundreds barrier. And at that moment, when it was surpassed, a new door was being opened in the world. It was that moment, as I readied myself for that brilliance. Huh? As the buy orders number inflated, things stopped. Completely. The situation before me was difficult for me to comprehend. Sell orders. What stopped the wave of buy orders was this. 620,000 shares in total. Could there be a lag in the system? Things moved at a horrifically slow and ominous pace, as if a massive meteorite had slammed to the star. Someone has... I mumbled as I immediately looked at the margin debt balance. But it didn't move. A new challenger? If that were the case, then I could just get rid of it all and claim victory. I put out an order with the remaining 100,000 shares I had. The trade volume opposed it, and then, in the remaining 2 minutes, The system moved. Buyers won out. This was going to work. Right when I thought that, I immediately on the screen, the margin debt balance decreased dramatically. Oh no. Oh god. It looks like they're gonna fail. My breathing stopped. What was displayed was what within the earlier trade was that within the earlier trading there were margin buyers within the ranks. And then those total numbers exceeded the statistical error Hagana had mentioned. That was the conclusion I came to. Sell. Ooh, very ominous. We weren't the ones who couldn't take it anymore. It was the margin buyers. What I was mumbling was wiped out by the roar of the demons in the last 2 minutes. The price reached 912 moles, and finally the buyers who were waiting to sell off their shares went and sold it all with full force. 908, 905, 901, 891, 882. It accelerated vigorously. Down to 1 minute, no one could stop a small amount of buying going on, and the game was over. The countdown on the screen stopped and showed that it was 5. The price was 862 moles. My average stock price was, strangely enough, 862 moles. In other words, all of our trading was meaningless, as our funds didn't increase by 1 mole. The conclusion? Defeated. I mumbled quietly. The result was 260 million moles, second place. The prize money was 50,000 moles. At that moment, a popping sound reverberated, indicating that mail had arrived on the computer. Perhaps it was a head-hunting solicitation, but why now? I ignored it and stretched my arms. Next to me, Hagana looked dumbfounded. It couldn't be helped. Hagana's forecast was off. Hagana mumbled something, but only tears came out. While looking at the numbers on the screen of the stationary computer, she cried expressionlessly. But I had nothing I could say. Instead, I placed my hand on Hagana's head and patted it roughly. When she had been frightened and sobbing in her room, she was covering up her head frantically. Thus, I patted her on the head. Hagana did not cover up her head. She just continued to cry without a single word. I gave her head one final light pat and then stood up from the chair. I wanted a drink, and I was tired. I also had to contact Barton. Giving a big stretch, I popped my joints. I could say that I didn't feel so upset about losing because it was all in an imaginary world. But probably more than anything else, it was from the sense of achievement of having come so far in lockstep with Hagana. I made sure to remember that just doing something like that could fulfill one's heart. It wasn't a bad experience. Not a bad one at all. But what was the mail that showed up? The phone? Even as the ding-dong chime rang indicating the arrival of new mail, I decided that was the time to use the bathroom. And then, at that precise moment, the phone on the wall started to ring. Perhaps Lisa was calling to find out about the result of the contest? I laughed sarcastically to myself as I picked up on the phone. Who is it? I expected to hear Lisa's high-spirited voice, so for a brief moment, the voice on the other end sounded like noise. Yeah, when he said that he expected to hear her voice, you know it wasn't her. It's me, Cyril. What the heck? Looking for Lisa? I responded in annoyance, as if he had ruined my expectations. Well, I was expecting Lisa too, but you guys have some free time, right? The way he said it, it almost seemed as if he knew about the investment contest. I believe that he did know about it, but did he really have that much interest in it? I guess. Well, in that case, I'm gonna head over. Huh? Wait, what's going on? I'll explain when I get there. Also, one more thing, bud. Harold stopped for a moment, as if he said that. How was Hagana doing? He really is a pedophile. Oh my god. He had been babbling about how he got his hands on something with a girl who looked like Hagana. Perhaps it really was Hagana. I was a bit amazed thinking about this, but it wasn't as if I had little interest in the matter. It's pretty bad. I said that on purpose. That took Sarah by surprise. I smiled bitterly as I wondered how much she was into Hagana. But what I heard next froze that smile. You really think Sarah's into Hagana? Toyama is also coming along. Please take care of things. Huh? What? Hey, wait up. Not hearing anything I said, Sarah hung up the phone. Toyama? He's with Sarah? At a loss, I looked at the silent phone. Maybe she had thought my conversation sounded strange. Hagana looked over while wiping tears from her eyes. Sarah asked how you were doing. That was how I worded it. Hagana had a dubious expression on her face. Okay, enough with the phone. Much like I did and answered. Not too bad. Hagana said that and sniffed loudly. It's my fault that we lost. How? I don't know. Enough with the phone, I get it already. Thank you. I put the phone back inside it. Hagana was awkward. She was very obedient, but awkward. Actually, it doesn't bother me all that much. It isn't just because I had decided from the beginning that I would give all the prize money to you. It's something more simple than that. I was embarrassed and rubbed my nose as I spoke. Besides, wasn't it fun? Then I looked at Hagana. Hagana looked at me blankly, and then she started crying again. They didn't appear to be tears of disappointment, though. She smiled tearfully, so I knew those weren't tears of disappointment. I wanted to see that picture. Come on, how much more are you gonna cry? I'm not crying. Hagana's smile disappeared as she said something absurd. I didn't feel like retorting, just shrugged my shoulders. Perhaps, but we have guests coming. What are you gonna do? Yeah, guests? Yeah, are you gonna shut yourself up in your room? Depends on who it is. Hagana answered bluntly. I hesitated for a moment, but I felt it would be bad for her just to hide. Seralt, and I don't want to see him. Toyama. At that last word, Hagana really stopped crying. Why? I don't know. On the phone he didn't tell me why. The loan. We can pay it back, right? Easily. But it would be some time before the prize money is received. On the other hand, the interesting thing is that he was expecting Lisa, it seems. At those words, Hagana raised an eyebrow. I didn't have any idea what it meant either. I wonder what's going on. I don't know. And Yoshiharu still hasn't checked that email. I really wonder if it's really important or it's just, like you said, somebody scouting him. Even though it was very on point. Maybe it was just congratulating him for second place. The contest congratulating him for second place. I don't know. Hagana wiped her eyes. But I am curious about the mail anyways. Then, as if she were some transforming hero, her expression changed. But we'll know when we see them. Exactly. Hagana had changed. That was probably for the better. Hagana and I, without saying a word, sat at the table and drank hot cocoa. I didn't remember who initiated, but until the intercom rang, my hand was on top of hers under the table. Aww. When I let go, it felt a bit lonely. Let's find out. Yo. When I opened up the church door, Cyril's big face was right in front of me. And then next to him, thin like a ghost with only sign of life in his eyes, stood Toyama. And that's all.
Now, it might seem like a big cut here because I actually recorded 2 episodes together this time, since the whole talk with Sarah and Toyama took much longer than I expected. It was a much bigger focus. So, I ended up recording 2 episodes together this time. Now, we had the final day of the contest. It had its ups and downs, their strategy. They waited patiently, and the whole thing of him always avoiding the demons, and this time he was becoming a demon to try to get those funds. But the circumstances just ambushed him, and others got the advantage on that. He did still get the 2nd place, and we never really got to see the email, but they did not succeed in getting 1st place. And I can't help but wonder what Sarah and Toyama want to talk about with him. Of course, I already know, but you guys will have to wait for next week. And with that being said, see you next time. Bye!